Welcome to the League of Women Voters Greater Rockford Candidate Forum. I am Joy Jordan, member of the Greater Rockford Chapter and moderator for today's forum. The League encourages informed and active participation in government and works to influence public policy through education and advocacy. The League is a nonpartisan volunteer organization that neither supports nor opposes candidates for elected office. Our goal today is to provide a virtual forum that gives the candidates an opportunity to share with you their positions on key topics. The views expressed by these candidates are their own, not the views of the League. The questions asked today have been previously submitted and reviewed for clarity and appropriateness to the forum today. This is not a debate. There is no rebuttal. The candidates will be presenting a 2-minute opening statement, given 2 minutes to respond to a question, and a 2-minute closing statement. The opening statements will be by alphabetical order, closing reverse alphabetical order. The responses of the candidates are being timed, and they will receive notice of 30 seconds left on their response time and must stop after completing their sentence when their time has expired. The session is being recorded. It is copyrighted by and the property of the League of Women Voters, Greater Rockford. Candidates, please unmute your microphones and start your video. The candidates participating in this forum today are seeking election to the state's attorney. They are Paul Carpenter and Jay Hanley. We will begin with opening statements, first by Paul Carpenter and followed by Jay Hanley. Each candidate has 2 minutes for their comments. Mr. Carpenter, please begin your opening comments.
Thank you. And thank you so much to the League of Women Voters for having us. It's really important that we all get an opportunity to hear the issues in these important races, and not just the state's attorney's races, but the other forums that you'll be holding too. My name is Paul Carpenter. I'm Democratic candidate for Winnebago County State's Attorney. I'm running on a platform of criminal justice reform, improving domestic violence prosecutions, and improving county government relationships. I've been an attorney in Northern Illinois in Rockford for 19 years. Half of that time was with the Winnebago County State's Attorney's Office, primarily in the civil division. I also handled some criminal cases as well. Prior to that, I was in private practice, representing individuals on various legal disputes as a solo practitioner, and was confirmed for that. Personally, I have 2 teenage kids. My son is 16, it's his birthday today actually, and my daughter is 14. They go to Rockford Public Schools. I'm a proud product of public schools from kindergarten up through law school, and that's important for me. My experience, I think the things that we need from a state's attorney are experience that I have, skills, and independence, and those are the things that I'll bring to the state's attorney's office, and I think those are the things that the voters and the community need. Thank you.
Thank you for your opening statements. Mr. Hanley, your opening comments, please.
Hi there, good afternoon. Thanks again for the opportunity. And Mr. Carpenter, happy birthday to your son. My name is Jay Hanley. I'm a candidate for Winnebago County State's Attorney. And I think the reasons for my opening statement and the reasons why I think the voters should vote for me is really 2 concepts. One, I'm uniquely qualified, and 2, I'm worthy of their trust. And I'm uniquely qualified because of the quality and breadth of my experience. I started as an assistant state's attorney here in Winnebago County under Paul Logley, and was responsible for the prosecution of misdemeanor crimes and then eventually felony crimes. And I was fortunate to be in Judge Collins' courtroom prosecuting primarily violent crimes. But I wanted to become a federal prosecutor, and so I became an assistant United States attorney for the District of Arizona. And that's where I really honed my investigatory and prosecutorial skills. I was prosecuting at the highest level, working with the best of the best prosecutors, the best federal agents, and I did human and drug smuggling, violent crime, and then some public corruption as well. But Rockford called me back. I was born and raised here, and so my wife and I moved back with our 2 children to Rockford, and I worked at Hinshaw and Culbertson as a civil litigator, and I'm currently the legal director of the Rock River Water Reclamation District. And so as you can see, I have prosecutorial experience and have done it at a high level, but I've also been a civil litigator and worked for a government agency as their legal director. So again, it's the quality and breadth of my experience. I do have 2 children. I also have a foster child in our house right now. I'm a product of Catholic education. Again, I'm born and raised here. I've left. I've worked in New York, Savannah, Georgia, Tucson, Arizona, but always happily boomerang back. And I'm looking forward to the forum today. So thank you.
Thank you both for your opening comments. We will now turn to questions that have been submitted, and each one of you has 2 minutes, and I will alternate between the 2 of you. The first question: do you believe that there should be more transparency in the office of the state's attorney? And if so, what steps do you plan to incorporate to make this happen? And we will start with Mr. Carpenter. Your response.
Sorry. I'm a big proponent of transparency. I think that it's important that everybody in the community who wants to know what's going on knows what's going on. One of the things that I think that we need to do a better job of, or that the state's attorney's office can do a better job of, is we see a lot of the bad news that comes from the criminal justice system, and I think we need to do a better job of promoting the good news. We watch the 10 o'clock news and we see, every day or every couple of days somebody gets sentenced to prison or sentenced to or charged with crimes. This week on Tuesday and Wednesday, they had graduations for the problem-solving courts. On Tuesday it was drug court, and on Wednesday it was the mental health court. And these are like big celebrations, great things that are happening in our community, in our criminal justice system, that are keeping people in the community, addressing the root causes of crime, and helping people become contributing members to our community. And those things, I don't know, I didn't see any news about those things, and I think that we need to make sure we're doing a better job of promoting the successes in our criminal justice system, and not just when somebody ends up getting sentenced to prison, that means there's been failures along the way. So we need to do a better job of promoting successes. As far as transparency goes, there's or other transparency, I guess there's a certain amount of, I guess there's a couple different levels on that. There's transparency in the criminal justice system that is largely governed by laws, rules regarding pretrial publicity for criminal cases. And there's, you can get statistics, I guess, but as far as like direct information, it's hard to do that in criminal, in pending criminal cases. In the civil division, I think that, we can, sorry, I'll just, I guess I can finish that sentence, I guess, at the stop sign.
Yes,
okay.
Finish.
In the civil division of the state's attorney's office, it's important to be transparent in county government as a whole, and that includes the civil division of the state's attorney's office.
Thank you for your comments. Mr. Hanley, your response, please.
Sure. So I think it's an important question because it really goes to the philosophy of the person, of the state's attorney in the office. And I think the current administration has been obstructionist and has felt that, it is better to keep things private or non-public. And I think that is a disservice to the public. And again, I think it's a philosophical issue, and I would come in with a philosophy that would welcome transparency, obviously with the understanding that there are laws that prevent certain disclosures. But again, I think there's been an obstructionist view. I think we need a dashboard. So there are some numbers that are important for the public to know when it comes to the criminal justice system. As an example, the number of days it takes from a case to go through the criminal justice system, it's almost a year currently, and that's totally unacceptable. And so that is an example of something where you would let the public know that that's not an acceptable number right now, and you would let the public know each quarter or each year what how you are doing. What is the average time it takes from arrest to disposition? So that's just an example. The city of Rockford, the police department has done this. I actually, on the campaign trail, hear people bring it up. They are aware that pre-COVID, the shootings were down. And I think that's really a result of a fairly simple dashboard that the public can see and hear about. And so I think that's a fairly simple way to communicate with the public on a daily basis. I also agree with my opponent. I do think that there are successes in the criminal justice system, and to the extent that they're there, they should be celebrated.
Thank you for your comments. The second question. Violent crime has been identified in 6 out of 10 voters as a key issue in this election. What would you support to make significant changes in our judicial policies to reduce crime, repeat offending, and juvenile incarceration? We will begin with Mr. Hanley. His response.
Sure. So let me just get a couple of statements out of the way. In terms of juvenile justice, incarceration should be reserved for only the most extreme cases. There's actually a lot of evidence that says absolutely nothing good comes of incarcerating juveniles. So I want to make that very clear. Maybe in a broader sense, I think we need to prioritize the prosecution of violent crime. And what I mean by that is our resources need to be devoted to the 10 or 20% of the criminal population that are causing most of our issues, the worst of the worst, if you will. And I think there's a few ways that can be done. I've suggested a gun court, a specific court that would handle gun crimes. I've also talked about the strategy of focused deterrence, which has worked in other places. It's been tried here in Winnebago County and probably needs to be tried again and really have the leadership of the state's attorney's office. And that, again, focuses on preventing the worst of the worst from committing those crimes when they do, punishing them both swiftly and severely. And then lastly, I do think it's a dogged determination to get to our youth, because one of the issues we have in Rockford is some of the shootings and violent crime are committed by 12, 13-year-old kids. And then, of course, they commit those crimes in the future. And so we have to somehow reach those children. The Family Peace Center will actually help with that, because it hopefully will identify children and youth who have been exposed to trauma, and they often become our offenders later. So I think, but I still think getting back to this concept of prioritization, I don't know that if that is the biggest problem, which, by the way, I agree with the people of Winnebago County, it is, then we should be devoting most of our resources to that issue. Thank you.
Thank you for your response. Mr. Carpenter, your response to the question?
Thanks. Juvenile, so the issue of violent crime starts with juveniles, and I think Mr. Hanley kind of alluded to that. When we see, in the state's attorney's office, we often see people charged with violent crimes, and the prosecutors often recognize the names as being victims of child abuse or neglect from 10 or 15 years earlier. And that, again, that's something, that means things aren't working right. We know that kids that are, have witnessed violence or are product of trauma in their houses are much more likely to be, to commit violent crimes later. And so we need to do a better job when we know them when they're young, to make sure that they're getting the resources they need, whether it's counseling or leadership people in their families or not in their families, but in the communities, to get them headed towards the right track. And the way we can do that is when we have cases in juvenile court called abuse and neglect cases, and they're not criminal cases, but they come in when a parent has been accused, usually by DCFS, of abusing or neglecting their kids. And the issue is whether or not the parents should be able to keep custody of their kids usually. And, whether or not the parents keep the kids, we still need to keep those kids on our radar and make sure that we're able to to reach out to them throughout, even after that case is done, throughout the years after that case is done. Because like I said, they're likely to, or they're at a higher risk of committing crimes later. So that's one big thing that we can do that I think we need to do. As Mr. Hanley said, the Family Peace Center is working towards that. And I'm trying to remember if there was anything else on that question, but I think I covered the main things that I want to
Right.
talk about. Violent crime obviously is the most important thing.
Thank you.
Criminal justice.
The next question. Race and ethnic inequality is an ongoing current issue with recent protests. Issues of police brutality remain a current issue. What major changes can be made in our systems for all people of our community to feel safe, have economic stability, and trust in our system for fair, equal justice? We will start with Mr. Carpenter.
Thank you. That's a great question that probably needs more than 2 minutes to answer. But I believe that Black Lives Matter. I believe that Black people, and other people of color, by the way, are subject to more harsh treatment by police than white people are, and that's something that we can't live with, that we can't sit back on. We can't hope for change. And by the way, there's momentum for change now, and we've got to take advantage of that. So what can we do? One of the first things that we can do is make sure that when we have complaints, that one of the things that the state's attorney's office can do is to accept complaints from citizens about criminal behavior by police. In other words, you can invite people to make complaints about police. Those complaints aren't investigated by the state's attorney's office, but they can get referred to police agencies, preferably to an independent agency other than than the agency where the officers that's complained of is working. But that's one of the things that the state's attorney in Cook County has done, and it's something that I think that we should do, and I think that it's not I think it's something that could really make a difference. One of the other things that we can do in the state's attorney's office is make sure that if we have a case that we discover that there's been police misconduct on, and that can be different forms of police misconduct. It can be not being truthful in reports or in other probable cause statements or testimony. It can be it can also include excessive force. When we see those things, we need to keep a database of that as sort of an early warning system, so that when other cases come through like that, we recognize those officers, that everybody in the office recognizes them as being somebody that we need to keep an eye on, to report them to their agency, and I think that would make a difference.
Thank you for your comments. Mr. Hanley, your comments, please.
Sure, and I agree with Paul. 2 minutes probably doesn't do this question justice, and so particularly with the fact that Black people are hurting right now, and I do think this is an important time, and that this momentum has to be seized. I'll talk a little bit more big picture. When you prosecute, you're pretty good at seeking justice on what I'll call a micro level, right? You've been referred a case from law enforcement. You go and prosecute that case, and you seek justice. I think the problem is the state's attorney, a modern state's attorney, has to start looking at it from a more macro level and thinking about the various decisions that are made along the criminal justice system and what explicit or implicit biases affect that. So that includes the police officer arresting, that includes the prosecutor accepting the case, that includes the prosecutor and the defense attorney who shepherd the case along the prosecution, that includes the judges, the jail guards, the Department of Corrections, probation. And so on a macro level, we need to look and say, because we know that people of color, and particularly Black people, are not treated equally. They are not. We know that. That is not a secret. And so I think, again, we too often look at this particular case, justice was served. And I think we need to take a much broader approach. One thing that I'm exploring, and I'm not making any promises, but I do think we need to have an independent prosecutor within the state's attorney's office. Most state's attorneys work with law enforcement on a daily basis. It is a symbiotic relationship, and that is okay. That is how it should work. However, I think there's a value in having a prosecutor that is independent within that office. The ultimate decision lies with the state's attorney, but by making a state's attorney and an investigator, again, have some independence, I think that'll be a step in the right direction, and really something that'll aid in the relationship between police and the state's attorney's office.
Thank you for your comments. The next question. Rockford voted for 1/2 cent tax increase for mental health care. As state's attorney, what programs will be supported from your office to spend the money wisely and reduce youth incarceration? Mr. Hanley, we will begin with your comments.
Sure, thank you. So I think the voters have spoken. They understand that we are at a crisis. And in a very practical way, we will have $10 to $12 million to spend on mental health issues in Winnebago County. And the criminal justice system is a part of that. And I think it's really one word, and that's diversion or interception, maybe is another way of saying it. And I think that's at the pre-arrest, the post-arrest, and the post-prosecution. And at pre-arrest, we have to empower and train our police officers to actually not arrest someone in mental health crisis and divert them to community resources. One of the ways we can do that is also have a co-responder program, which I do think should be implemented, and I think it actually will be here in the next few weeks here in Rockford, and that'll go a long way to preventing someone with mental health crises from ever entering the system at all. Secondly, in post-arrest, so someone is arrested, they enter the jail, we need to evaluate them and make sure, and if there's a mental health issue, then they would be, hopefully, if it's appropriate and it's a nonviolent crime, they would, again, be diverted to the community, where there are community resources like your Rosecrances that are far better at handling mental health issues. Again, that person would be diverted out of the jail. Lastly, we need to continue to fill the mental health specialty court. There needs to be, it should be filling to the brim, and we need to continue to have those resources available for the mental health court. That it works, it is proven, and we need to follow the model of like a Miami-Dade County or Pima County in Tucson, Arizona, who have, in fact, in Pima County, they have gotten rid of an entire wing of their jail because they have been so successful in diverting those with mental health issues out of the criminal justice system. That should be the goal of Winnebago County, and under my leadership, we'll get there.
Thank you for your comments. Mr. Carpenter, your comments, please.
Thank you. So there's a couple things that we need to be doing with the mental health sales tax money. One is making sure that all police agencies in Winnebago County have a crisis intervention team for police officers who are trained to respond to people having mental health crises. It's a different response than what a normal police response is. The second thing that we need to do is, and by the way, we can use some of that mental health sales tax money to provide the training that the agencies need to make sure that those the crisis intervention teams are trained and ready to respond. Second is juvenile resources. I talked a few minutes ago about the importance of providing counseling or other services for youth that are victims of abuse or neglect. That's something that we can build on, or that we can use the mental health sales tax to build on. The third thing is a sort of a law enforcement or an arrest triage, where if a police officer arrests somebody, they're evaluated before they get into jail. And I kind of think this was along the lines of what Mr. Hanley was saying, but they're evaluated before they're being put in jail to determine whether this is it really a criminal issue or is it a mental health issue. So those are some things that we need to make, or that I think that the mental health sales tax could be used for. When I served in the state's attorney's office, I was the legal advisor to the Community Mental Health Board. And so I know that they're working on doing a community scan of what resources the community needs, and they're very dedicated, and they're going to make recommendations that are what's best for the community. And I know that those are some of the things that they're looking at. And I know that youth, mental health of youth is also an important issue.
Thank you for your comments. The next question. 35% of the crime in the city is related to domestic violence. Name 3 specific steps you will take in your first year in office to improve the office's response to domestic and sexual violence. Mr. Carpenter, we'll start with your response.
Thanks. The first thing that I'm going to do is make sure we have a great relationship with the Family Peace Center. I'll get into that in a little bit. The second thing that I'm going to do is make sure that our chief of the domestic violence unit, the and the state's attorney's office is part of the executive leadership of the state's attorney. That it's more than just symbolic. I mean, it symbolizes that it's a priority to the office, but it's more than just symbolic, because we need to make sure that the domestic violence unit is, that the chief of the domestic violence unit has the ear of the state's attorney at all times. The third thing, as far as domestic violence prosecutions go, that we need to do is make sure that that before we set cases for trial, we know whether or not that case is likely to go to trial. Right now, this was pre-COVID numbers, there's one domestic violence courtroom, and there's 2 weeks a month that they have jury trials. And so the week before the jury trial date, there's a jury status call on a Friday afternoon, or Friday during the day usually. Before COVID, there was 75 cases set for trial on most of those weeks, and at most 1 or 2 of those cases was going to go to trial. That's a lot of resources being devoted to cases that are not going to be going to trial, and it costs money because it costs. We have to subpoena 1 or 2 officers on every case. We're subpoenaing, trying to track down survivors on all these cases. And so what we need to do is be working with the Family Peace Center to make sure that survivors have the resources they need to make decisions about how they want to be involved in the prosecution of those cases, that they're empowered to make those decisions, that they're not scared of the abuser, that they're not relying on the abuser for financial resources or childcare or other things, and that they're empowered to make their decisions accordingly.
Thank you. Mr. Hanley, your comments on this question?
Sure. So I think when it comes to the prosecution of domestic violence, as I mentioned before, we need to prioritize. So that's a resource issue. Right now, there aren't enough resources. The state's attorneys don't understand how important those cases are. And that's really a cultural issue or a philosophy. And I think we've got to work towards what sometimes is inartfully called the no drop policy, where our attorneys understand that just because a victim isn't available, that's not an excuse to dismiss the case. Certainly there are cases that cannot be proven without a survivor. However, there are plenty of cases that can be and should be. And that starts from in the beginning of the investigation all the way through. And so that's a cultural issue where we are going to devote resources and we are going to understand that these are cases that must be won. When it comes to victims, from the moment a victim calls 911, the system is working against them. And that needs to change. And so the state's attorney's office is not solely responsible for that, but they are a huge part of that. And it's not just a victim witness coordinator. It is your state's attorneys being trauma informed and understanding the needs of victims. It takes work, but it's important work. And again, the resources need to be there. Lastly, with the Family Peace Center, I think it's important to have a prosecutor there. It would be my goal to have at least one prosecutor stationed at the Family Peace Center and one victim witness coordinator, preferably bilingual, at the Family Peace Center. And so you use both the resources of the office, but also the influence of the office to support the Family Peace Center. As far as a supervisor of the unit, there's always been a supervisor of the domestic violence unit, as far as I know. And I don't know how a supervisor couldn't have the ear of the state's attorneys. So I would never not, a supervisor would never not have my ear if I was elected state's attorney. And so there would be a supervisor of the state's or of the domestic violence unit, and we would communicate on a daily basis.
Thank you for your responses to these questions. We will now turn to the closing statements. First, Mr. Hanley, followed by Mr. Carpenter. Each of you will have 2 minutes to discuss your closing statement. So the first closing statement, Mr. Hanley, please begin.
Sure, thank you. So I think the voters really have to answer 3 questions. And the one is, which candidate's more qualified? Which candidate has a more specific and better plan? And lastly, which candidate do you trust? And I think the qualifications, there's really no comparison. I have a prosecutorial experience that is unmatched as compared to my opponent. And I think it speaks for itself, both as a prosecutor here in Winnebago County and as a federal prosecutor, again, prosecuting at the highest level. I've been a prosecutor for almost 8 years. In terms of a specific plan, I would encourage everyone to go to my website. I have laid out the 4 pillars, which are restore faith in the state's attorney's office, be more efficient in moving defendants through the system, prioritize the prosecution of violent crime, and to redirect those with mental illness, abuse victims, and youth from the criminal justice system. And it is, again, it is an audacious plan, it is specific, and it is achievable. Lastly, I think that trust issue is really important. Not everyone is an expert on criminal justice. We all certainly have our thoughts and opinions. We all recognize that it is the #1 issue we face in Winnebago County. And so we need to elect someone who we trust to work tirelessly to keep our families safe. And I will do that. Again, thank you for your time.
Thank you for your comments. Mr. Carpenter, your closing statements.
Sure. I think that the voters need to look at the experience of the candidates. My experience has been 9.5 years in the state's attorney's office, 9.5 years in private practice. Both of those things are really important for a state's attorney to have. First of all, the state's attorney needs to understand what it means to be sitting across the table or next to a defendant who's making decisions that are going to have significant impacts on their lives. Also, they need to be able to have worked with victim survivors of cases that the cases also have significant impacts on their lives. The second thing, or my experience, so those are a couple of things in my experience. I've tried cases in state court, in federal court. I've successfully argued appeals in state and federal appellate courts. I've been an arbitrator, a mediator in courts. I've negotiated intergovernmental agreements between the county and municipalities. My experience is second to none as far as the breadth of my experience and the total amount of my experience, really. My vision for criminal justice reform, for improving domestic violence prosecutions, for improving county government relationships, which we didn't get into a whole lot, but it's really important for the state's attorney to take a lead in county government issues, because the state's attorney, in addition to being the chief prosecutor, is also the civil attorney for all the elected officials and county department heads. So I've had a lot of experience working with all the county officials, with all the county department heads, and we need to make sure that we're working together to solve problems instead of, and my ability as an arbitrator, mediator, these things are indicative of my ability to bring people together to solve problems instead of letting them turn into costly, unnecessary lawsuits. I think those are the things that the voters in Winnebago County want. I'm Paul Carpenter. I'm asking for your vote for state's attorney for Winnebago County. Thank you.
Thank you both for your closing comments. And thank you both for participating in our forum today. This forum was brought to you by the League of Women Voters for Greater Rockford. Please exercise your right to vote on or before November 3rd. And thank you again to the candidates for participating. Have a good day.
Thank you.